Greetings, everyone. If you're here tonight for our event with Stephen Hunter, but were perhaps turned away from your computer while you were washing dishes or folding laundry, now is the time to put your eyes front and center as we'll be getting started momentarily. So, hello, my name is Tom Wickersham from the Mysterious Bookshop, and tonight it's my real pleasure to welcome Stephen Hunter to celebrate his latest book, Targeted. Stephen Hunter is the author of, I don't even have the number in front of me, but I'm sure it's countable, but numerous to countless novels, many of them featuring the Swagger clan. Targeted continues that story. He is also the Pulitzer Prize winning former film critic for the Washington Post and a beloved friend to readers and particularly thriller and mystery readers. So we're delighted to have him here with us tonight. And so to begin, Stephen, obviously we don't want to spoil too much about the new novel, but if, in just a sentence or two, want to tell our viewers who likely haven't had the chance to read it since it was just released 2 days ago, what the premise is?
Oh, it's another hostage situation. They're very good for what I do well, and they're also very good at avoiding what I don't do well. So you always write to your strengths, such as they are. In this case, Bob has been called to testify at a congressional hearing, which is a field hearing, moved to Boise, Idaho, and it becomes clear that the people who are grilling him don't really have his best interest in mind, but their own political ends in mind. In the middle of this, just when it seems that things are about to go terminal, they go terminal literally in that the hearing is taken over very violently by a crew of escaped drug dealers, and they crash into the high school auditorium in a big green school bus, and so it suddenly goes from the back and forth, the cat and mouse of dialogue under oath to the cat and mouse of guns versus guns and knives versus flesh and violence versus passivity. And it's calculated to be very tight. I mean, I'm trying in this one to just make you start, and hopefully you're going to sit in that damn chair until the cows come home, and you will finish the book. There's not a lot of breathing room in it, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of action, lots of bang bang. My attempts at clever courtroom repartee. Maybe you think it's clever, maybe you don't. I did the best I could. What can I say?
I think that there's, yes, it's perhaps, I don't want to speak definitively in case I'm forgetting something, but it might be the most compact of your novels, though it does deliver two things that we've come to expect from many of the recent installments, which is beyond dedication to sort of some of the latest cutting technology when it comes to firearms and tactics. You also have a historical plot line, which I believe was actually adapted out of a novel you were trying to write about the Revolutionary War at one point. So we see the Swaggers in the present, but also further back than we've ever seen them before.
That's exactly right. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to write this novel. I always wanted to do a Swagger origin story, and I've been teasing it for book after book after book. And there was this mysterious couple that came in from over the hills over the mountains in the year 1780, and we assumed that they were refugees of some sort from the Revolutionary War, which in the South in the 1780s was extremely violent. It was very Vietnam-like. It was just a terrible, tragic time. And people who don't realize how bloody, how long, how worn, how wearing out, how losing blood and treasure the Revolutionary War was. That was an issue that I wanted to convey, and I wanted someone to learn. I wanted to get into the record where the name swagger came from, and I wanted to get into the record where the great swagger gene for shooting came from. And so this gave me an opportunity to do the two of them, to get those issues before my readers. And number two, it gave me a chance to break from my sort of, I don't know, sarcastic, funny, hip kind of voice I've encountered. I've indulged in later in my career, and for some reason I love to pretend like I'm writing in 19th or 18th century British, and I don't know why it comes easy to me. It's enormous fun to do. So those sequences are written in an entirely different voice, and I like the way the two voices play off each other. I mean, that's I believe it would be one of the secret pleasures of this book. Though some people will say, huh? What? What's this? But that's the game. That's what happens.
No, I found it actually to be an unexpected pleasure where initially I thought, how could I be distracted by anything when we have this, heart pounding hostage situation right in front of me? But then I came away wanting a novel length Revolutionary War, French and Indian War, anything with more of these characters. And I also enjoyed it. I imagine that the same way that you clearly relished tackling samurai swords in the 47th Samurai, as someone who is a big fan of swashbuckling movies and actually used to fence, I imagine that you took great pleasure in researching some of the dueling and depicting some of those scenes the way that you're better known for, depicting modern firearms.
That is exactly and precisely true. I had a sword fight that I wanted to write, and I've been wanting to write it, and I saw it very clearly, and I've seen it very clearly for about 20 years. It's two men fighting a Florentine. A Florentine means with a sword in each hand, in the mud, in the rain, in the cold. And it's not elegant at all. It's like interior line play in the National Football League. It's brutal. It's muscular. It's incredibly exhausting. It involves a lot of lunging and lurching, a lot of slipping and missing, a lot of there's nothing Errol Flynn-esque about it, even though of course it was inspired by the great swashbuckler. But I just wanted to I just I have if you're in my business, you have scenes you want to write, and you do look for places to stick them in. And this was been trying to get this thing in print for years, and I finally figured out a way to do it, and I'm very pleased. I don't know who else will be pleased, but I'm very pleased with the way it turned out, and I'm very pleased to have finally launched it into reality, such as it is.
Are you a George MacDonald Fraser fan?
I absolutely adored those books. Yeah, and I loved him. He was it was a great conceit. Fraser was a very fine writer. And I happen to have a weakness for 19th century British imperial history and all the little wars, Queen Victoria's little wars. And, it so too did Fraser, and he visited virtually all of them. He even at one point managed to get Flashman over to the United States in time for the Little Bighorn. So he and Jack Crabb, as the only two survivors of the Little Bighorn, they would have lots of fun drinking together at some disreputable dive in Brixton or something like that. That would be, I wish Fraser were alive to write that scene.
Yeah.
Believe me, wouldn't that be great?
I think there was sort of rumored, I think he alludes to Flashman being at Gettysburg. And
that's
one
true.
Of the,
that is, I was going to say that. Yeah,
yeah.
And I think he died before he got around to writing that book. But I would love to see Flashman at Little Round Top. Wouldn't that not be a book? Would
But it
that
also
be a book?
it reminded me both the fight that you depicted, but I think also your sensibilities, and I, also bring this up as a film buff. But in much the way that I love the Errol Flynn films, I know he didn't direct it, but he wrote it, and I imagine it is some of his sensibilities. His Three Musketeers, when you see the fencing, even though it's somewhat comical, it also feels much more desperate and realistic, in that it's not terribly balletic. It feels like it's real human beings holding their swords as tools, and they're genuinely afraid for their life, and throwing laundry at each other and doing all kinds of things that you never see in film. And there's a way in which I think that's seldom been depicted with guns on screen or in books that you're often sort of praised and recognized for, and that it takes a real knowledge and even if you haven't experienced it firsthand yourself, a real recognition of what the human factor of being in such a situation would actually be like.
That's true, Tom. And I realize at this late date in my career that, to some degree, my career has always been a rebuke. In a, I don't mean to sound that in a sanctimonious way, but I've always reacted against all the stories and all the movies I saw in which something seemed wrong. And one of my pleasures was trying to get this stuff at a slightly higher level of reality, and just make it a lot more urgent, a lot more physical. People don't get how physically hard fighting is. It's exhausting. It's draining. It's. I'm a former quarter miler, and a fight, I'm guessing, is like the last 100 yards of a quarter mile, and that sort of sense of just feeling the strength drain out of you, but nevertheless having to continue to stay alive. That's something. Try to get a flavor, a whiff of that into the works, both in gunfights and in the two or three sword fights I've done. Um, uh, and I do that again, not out of some pompous sense of mission, but because it's fun. I mean, I think basically every storyteller begins with the following. He begins his career with the following words, and those words are: he turns to a friend after seeing a movie, or they've both read a book, and he says, it would have been better if.
Mm-hmm.
And he
Mm-hmm.
explains how he would have improved it. And I'm one of the, 0.00001% who actually went ahead and followed the impulse of making something better if, and in providing the better if. Perfect example being Hot Springs. Bugsy Siegel was in it. I had seen Warren Beatty and Annette Bening. Believe me, Bugsy and his girlfriend didn't look like Warren Beatty and Annette Bening. And it just, while the movie itself was quite enjoyable, it was just at the same time it was wrong. It was just it got everything wrong, and I had this sort of just this. I had this urge to fix it, to make it right, and something like that. You just can't discount that as a motive in trying to get. Well, to go in a slightly different direction. One of the issues of my business is energy. It takes a lot of energy to do these things. Where does it come from? Well, some people are chronic workers. I'm not. I have to manufacture sources of energy, and that urge to fix, which seems to have been wrong. That's a very powerful source of energy. That's gotten me through many a night, and it's just. Again, there's a sort of a secret writer's pleasure in saying to Barry Levinson, "See, I did it better than you." Or particularly that's case. What was that guy's name? Michael Mann, who directed Public Enemies.
Yes.
I read a book called G-Med.
Yeah.
And Michael Mann, guess what? I did it better than you did.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very pleasing and satisfying for me.
Now, did you ever see Highwaymen?
I did, but after the fact.
Well, I know it was released after the fact. I don't mean to, but I think I even remember you wrote an afterword where you bemoaned that that was probably the last time we'd get a big budget depiction of the times. And I know you didn't dwell on Bonnie and Clyde, which was the whole focus of that film. But
I just started it with Bonnie and Clyde with the takedown because
yeah.
it's so well. It's so engraved. It's so seared in the mind of the baby boomers because we all saw it when we were juniors or colleges in college, and it just we were at a vulnerable period in our lives, intellectually and imaginatively, and it sunk into our brains. And we probably watch it again when it comes on TCM or something like that. Again, it's a movie in which it's a wonderful movie. The performances are riveted. Arthur Penn is an excellent director, particularly Buck Gene Hackman. It made Gene Hackman a star, for which we can all be grateful. But everything in it is wrong. Everything is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And to sort of fix it, as I was fixing Public Enemies, again, that was very satisfying to me. There were also, it so happened that all that came out right around the time of the 75th anniversary of the Bonnie and Clyde, the ending of their story. And there were 3 or 4 books in the marketplace, and I bought them all and I read them all. And I mean no disrespect. Writing a book is hard work, but I thought they all needed fixing. So that book, G-Men, that was a massive fix the world project. That was my contribution to the greatness of Western culture, I suppose. But I try to get that stuff right finally, and that's a source of energy. That's a solar furnace blazing away and keeps you going.
One, I appreciate that. I think that you straddle a very delicate line between getting those things right, as you say, but it seems that it's what you would want to. You're not doing it from some sort of um, intellectual sense of authority where you just want to prove that you know better, but you also want to get it right, and that what you as a fan would have enjoyed. I remember that in the film Public Enemies, beyond all the history that's wrong, we see the fully automatic, the Liebman 1911 for a flash in the dark.
Yeah.
And, not to just dwell on, gun porn, but it's maybe the coolest gun ever. And I want to see more of that. And it's, I read your book and it's there it all is.
Show it, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
Talk about it. At least
Yeah.
give it 30 seconds. Michael, what's wrong with you? And that's true, exactly, because I think the truth is more exciting than the fiction. And the challenge of connecting the dots and depicting the truth in action that's more fun because making it totally up tends towards the generic. Pretty soon, everything looks like everything else, which also looks like everything else. And I mean, I must have seen 20,000 gunfights in the movies in my life, and they're almost all the same. And so you look for, when I stop and think about it, there must be probably no more than 10 that I really, that come to my mind as being, not only technically good and visually good and dramatically good, but also sort of mythically good, if you will, and that are just there and will always be there.
Well, I have to ask, if not 10, maybe at least for 3 of them.
Okay, well, one, of course, would be the Wild Bunch.
Yep.
You can't see that and forget it. There's a gunfight, believe it or not, in an Orson Welles movie called The Lady from Shanghai.
Yep.
It takes place in a fun house, Hall of Mirrors. And I have a little secret fetish for bullets going through glass. And that is the bullets in glass nirvana. I mean, that is like it's like a brothel of bullets going through gas, through glass. And I really liked the low key reality of High Noon. That
Hmm.
they thought hard about men fighting with guns in the street with pistols and what would work and what wouldn't work. And that's a very physical, hot, dusty, sweaty gunfight, and it just and things sort of awkward things happen. It's not all beautiful. Another gunfight like that is John Ford's version of the gunfight at the OK Corral at the end of My Darling Clementine. Those are two very good old school Western gunfights that capture the reality of the gunfight in vivid ways and aren't generic, are
Mhm.
insist on being themselves. And I found those very, very interesting. And then I also have to say that all the gun usages in the Godfather movies is
Hmm.
very, very well thought out and very precisely. And it's again, it's memorable. It's he thought hard about what details do I include,
Yeah.
make this memorable that you'll never forget. And it's not like any of the 19 gunfights you'll see on TV that week. And that was that I appreciate greatly.
Lots of glass and glasses.
Yes, indeed.
What about Way of the Gun?
Yeah, I've seen that a dozen times, and
Yeah.
I do like that. And I actually talked to the director. I think his name is Dennis Quarry about it.
Yeah. Query.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
A really nice guy. He's going on to have a very good career. And he was the writer, not the director, but he was the writer on The Usual Suspects. Anyway, his brother was a former SEAL,
Oh.
and while he was shooting that, he brought those guys. He brought his brother to the set, and he talked to those guys, all the people who were shooting, about actual shooting in close quarters combat. And so that movie has a kind of a feel to it that's very different than the generic. And since we're on the subject, I will mention a movie called Shooter, which
Hmm.
happens to be based on my book. And that movie, they also had a former Marine sniper on set as an advisor, and he taught them gun handling. They also went to a gun summer camp, if you will. I've been to a few. I know what most people will know what I'm talking about. Gun training regimen. So the gun handling in that movie is different and unique, and I think that's why that movie has become such a cult sensation.
Hmm.
And even if people don't get it, if even people can't identify it or articulate it, they know they're seeing something different,
Yeah.
and they're getting a different vibration off of that than they get out of the gunfight on the FBI on CBS last night between 9 and 10. And um, that's what that quality of difference is what I'm trying to bring to my novels.
Hmm.
I'm trying to uh, I won't say they're ultra realistic, because obviously there's some concessions to genre and tradition that I'm willing to make, but I try and make those memorable and singular, and frequently I will base them on gunfights in reality that may or may not be have been part of something I'm writing about, but just the way the people move, and people do irrational things in the
Yeah.
middle of gunfights, and it's to try and get that sense of spontaneity, irrationality, and sometimes luck, sometimes craziness, sometimes courage, sometimes cowardice. But there's a sort of a whole tapestry of real human reactions that I try and build into the action sequences that I write about that I hope makes it a little bit different than some of the other books out there.
Well, I don't mean to steer too far away from your books, though. I like to hope that presumably most people who are tuning in have some familiarity with you, and that if anything, they might want to hear the answers to some of the questions that I'm asking. And the book almost sells itself, but we will get back to it. But what you just said, are you familiar with Jim Cirillo, the Stakeout Squad?
He was the great New York gunfighter.
Yeah.
I think he killed 17 men or something like that. He was part of what was called a stakeout unit in the 70s. And the department responded to, there was a spate or a plague of, of small mom and pop store robberies by very violent guys. So the New York Police Department put a lot of uh, people started hiding people in these stores, and they would ambush the the robbers. And there were a lot of gunfights and a lot of people, but not many policemen got killed. And Jim Cirillo was he was the champion of, he was the leading uh, winner in those confrontations. And what I thought, he told a funny story. Indulge me if you will, Tom. He he was a firearms instructor, and he got assigned to this new unit, and he wasn't particularly eager to get in gunfights. And they said to him, "Look, this is all public relations. It's just to do something so we can say we're not going to do something. You will probably never get in a gunfight." He said, "Oh, okay, okay." So he shows up in the mom and pop store. He's behind he's in the little room off the store for 3 minutes, and he's in a gunfight. And he went on and had many, many gunfights because he was a good shot and a very brave man. He survived, and he lived. He wrote several books, became a celebrity. Went and joined the federal government as a firearms trainer. I think he died in a ridiculous traffic accident a few years ago. But he's one of my law enforcement heroes.
Well, and because it also strikes me that it's both the way in which you describe gunfights, and there'll even be instances where he and another officer who was his partner on the stakeout remember things completely differently. Things happen with no predictability. Gun bullets travel at ways you would never expect. No one remembers anything. But then also where they were in many ways, they wouldn't intercede unless there was literally a gun in the face of a civilian, but they were also then predictably received much criticism in the media as being trigger happy.
They did.
And it seems like it's both the type of situation you try and depict in realism, but also the type of perhaps political dynamic that is the centerpiece of Targeted, to bring it back to the new book.
That a very good segue, but indeed, the book actually stems from a long suppressed anger of mine at a certain ceremonial auto da fe we hold every few years in this country. And that is when men and women of inaction who have never done anything dangerous in their life, who have never risked anything, and who furthermore know nothing, set them up to judge and punish men of action who have indeed risked their lives and who have indeed taken enormous chances for we take for granted the benefit of society, and who are subject to those perverse, irrational, accidental, whimsical dynamics that course through a chaos event like a gunfight. And I've always hated that. And in Targeted, I take what is supposedly a good law enforcement killing, and it's put to the test by some people who think there is no such thing as a good law enforcement killing, and try to sort of pick it apart and tell the participants, one of particularly Bobley Swagger, what he should have done, and to try and hold him morally culpable of what he did do in mere tenths of seconds. And that's that. If there's a agenda to the book, it's that I don't like people who know nothing, literally nothing, judging people who have, as we say, touched the elephant, been there, did that, who are in these impossible situations, unpredictable situations. And no one, it seems to me, has the right but peers. And I really do mean peers to judge them for what they've done in those circumstances, to A, themselves survive, and B, help the society maintain some semblance of order. And as the agendas change, it seems like these sort of occurrences are happening more frequently than they used to happen.
I'm curious, do you feel that have you ever so consciously written a political novel before?
That's a very interesting question. And I honestly, yes and no. Yes, yes. The answer is yes. And it almost doesn't matter whether I say yes or no because stuff goes in and stuff goes out. And you have nothing, when you do this kind of work, you have nothing to use except the stuff that's gone in. And whether you intend to make it political or whether it just expresses your values, which have political coefficients, is a question that can't be really answered. For example, my most political book heretofore was called Soft Target, about another hostage situation, this one in a shopping center in a mall based on the Mall of America. And I probably overdid it in that book. I made the mall, I even gave it the exterior, just so the symbolism wasn't even, I wouldn't call it symbolic, I would call it allegorical. I tried to let loose some of the dynamics in this situation that were at that time also in politics and also in culture. And that was a pointed attempt to do to do something quote political. And in fact, that saved that book. I had was about halfway through it, and it just was not working. It was just tepid and pointless, and it wasn't going anywhere. And then I had this idea to give it a this allegorical structure and to make the characters perhaps over obviously who they were. And once that happened, it came alive in my imagination. What I have to do is I've got to get my imagination really, it's got to get it turned up to 11 to get through the writing process. And if it's stuck down there or 3 or 4, I'm not publishable. I'm just not publishable. I'm nothing. So some of it is my own politics and values. Some of it is my need to find some source of energy to get me through the long nights, and some of it is just because it's so damn much fun. And it's all three of those. It's not any one thing at any one time. It's all three of those mulched and squished and Cuisinarted together over the space of however long it takes to write.
I guess part of that question is because it would be hard not to imagine that a certain type of voter would appreciate this book, your latest book, more than another. But it seems that in many ways, your philosophy or what you would consider as your values, but also the villains, are unchanged, going back to Point of Impact, where you have corrupt CIA, loose stand-ins for El Salvador, or Iran Contra malfeasance, to syphilis experiments in the South, but things that would be considered in many ways sort of anti-authoritarian, but pro dignity, pro honesty, just anti-corruption. But that it's interesting where those values can either change in their alignment or how they're exhibited by what you see as the current form of who's in power, or at least who the political figures who would be opposed to Swagger today are, versus who his enemies would have been 30 years ago.
Excellent point, and well stated, perhaps more well stated than I have. When I think about it, I do understand that is a strain of the books through the stories that could be taken as radically left. And you mentioned several. One is accusing, implying violent corruption uh, in El Salvador, in some of the using us, obviously the Tuskegee experiments as a basis of a book, and I feel that my values have been consistent. They're a straight line, but as you say, society is continually rearranging itself around those values. And sometimes you find yourself of the left, and sometimes you find yourself of the right, but at least to yourself, you haven't changed. And I don't believe I've changed. Though the other thing I will say is that I too get sick of agendas in politics, and I am very happy to say that my next book is set in World War II, and it is free of agendas in politics, except that I think we can all agree that stopping the Nazis was a good idea. Don't you think we can come together on that one? Okay. So I think I'm okay there. But yes, indeed, it can be played each way. And I've seen some responses to Targeted, and you would think that, as you say, a certain kind of voter would be more attracted to it than another certain kind of voter. But that second kind of voter might be attracted to it because they would see in it some reference to some vibration of some fragrance of the January 6th event. And it was written before January 6th, but people bring their own. See, I mean, that's the X factor. People bring their own attitudes and their own preconceptions and their own values to any piece of work, and that's, as much as anything, determines how they're going to respond to it. And it's a thing I can't control, and I invite people thinking that, if you buy the book, you can interpret it any way you want. That's what you get with for your $28. So
Well, I think that it's a very it's a very fair and inclusive answer. And so I just wanted to say I'm delighted to keep asking my own questions, and I will for at least a few more minutes. But I would also be happy to have any audience members please chime in the chat. I'll see it in our feed, and happy to then ask the questions for Saul, for Stephen to answer. But I am curious on 2 points in World War II. You had a novel last year, Basil's War, which I'd be remiss in not bringing up, which was a World War II. Actually, I guess when we were kind of talking about swashbuckling and classic film, I imagine that some of your affections were indeed displayed through that novel, and I wonder if we might be getting a sequel to that, even though I believe the next one is going back to Earl Swagger.
It is going back to Earl Swagger. However, it opens with Basil,
Oh,
and we get a good uh, 60 pages of Basil. Basil is Basil. He's extraordinary. He's, I hope, charismatic. I also hope he's highly amusing. And his spirit hovers over the book and animates the book, and is in fact one of the main impulses of the book. Will I write if another Basil? I have a great plot mapped out. Very, it would just be, you know, here's what I have a rhythm in my career. It wasn't something I decided on; it just happened. And I write a book like Targeted, which is tense and fast and hard and very, I hope, very, very fast moving. And then I write a bigger book, which is far more researched, which is far more leisurely, which is usually set in history, and which gives me which is more ambitious both artistically and psychologically, and uh, and I like to do that kind of book too. And but I like to go back and forth between them. I like that rhythm. So after the next book is called, be out next year. I hope next year. I mean, I could even be out sooner. It could be out at the end of this year. It's called The Bullet Garden with Earl Swagger, and it's actually set. Even though Earl is a Marine, I managed to get him to Normandy, the Battle of Normandy, not the Normandy invasion. And I just loved writing that book. I loved every second of it. I love a world where there's no cell phones. I hate cell phones.
mhm.
There's no internet. It just was so much fun. People carry Tommy guns. They don't carry guns that look like pieces of plastic plumbing. They look like guns, and you know, so uh, this other Basil novel is I'll have to write a shorter novel after that, and then I would do this Basil novel. But I've got some other ideas that also I just hope I don't run out of time. I mean, I have a lot of ideas, I have a lot of energy, I have a lot of optimism, and I want to keep doing this until I'm at least 75. Wait a minute, I am 75. I want to keep doing this until I can't.
Well, I was curious. I mean, this is a sort of a multi-part question, but without prying too much, if you don't want to reveal the whole premise of the Earl book, or what other things you're hoping to get right, as you put it? Because I know that you, at least in something I read, alluded to having considered a Western but never quite followed through. We talked about the segments of your Revolutionary War novel, which again I really enjoyed thoroughly, that appear and targeted. Or I was also curious about just a straight ahead war novel, which if this is the furthest back we're seeing Earl, and there were obviously flashbacks, but it sounds like this is going to be entirely set during the Second World War,
Uh,
or at least it's going to be the quote unquote present in the Second World War.
all of those are serious possibilities. I, I still I want to do a western. I don't know if I'll have time, but I've always wanted to do a western. I've got an idea for one that would be sort of fun to do. Um, it would be lots. It's just be fun to do, and I somehow that the ideas come and then they slide away, and then they reignite several years later. For the Bullet Garden, for example, it's a book. It was an idea I had years ago, and I tried to sell it, and some people didn't want it, and I put it aside. The, the years passed, and I was sitting last a couple of years ago. I was sitting with some friends in the backyard, smoking a cigar and drinking bourbon, and someone said to me, "What are you working on now? You've got a new book idea?" And suddenly, I from nowhere, I said, I've got a book I might do called The Bullet Garden. And I recited the plot premise and the developments to them entirely spontaneously. And their fabulous response was just gasoline on the fire of my own spontaneous excitement. And I called Esther, my agent, and said, "This is what I want to do next. Can we get it sold somewhere?" I said, "I don't really care what the arrangements are, just so I have a publisher I could give it to, and we can get it." And she was a super, she really did it well and got it where it should be. And so that's that whole part of it worked very well for me. Although I will confess, it cost me not a small amount of money. That's okay, that's part of the game too. And so I'm very pleased now. And I don't know what of the sort of ideas I have simmering. One of those is going to ignite. It's like some methane is going to emit from it, and a spark is going to, and that'll be the one I do next. And I can't predict that, or maybe it'll be a completely different idea. I can't predict that, or maybe a comet will hit the Earth and we'll all be dead. So one of those possibilities will happen.
Now, do you have any? I'm sure you probably wouldn't object if the right thing came around, but we only barely touched. I mean, clearly we touched on your passion for film, but your career as a film reviewer and how you have seen a movie and a TV series based off of your works.
Yes.
Is there any, is there anything current? I know that often authors have something that's technically optioned, but is there any hope for another season of Shooter or another Swagger or other film or television project?
There have always been rumors about another season of Shooter because it did pretty well, and was it's considered, it goes in the books as a hit rather than a failure. Uh, as far as the mainstream movies, one of Hollywood's favorite books not to make a movie of is Dirty White Boys.
Oh yes.
And every once in a while, there's a little flare of attention and activity on that. And in fact, the guys who did Game of Thrones were very attracted in that to that. And at one point, they thought they were going to make it, but HBO just kept throwing money at them, and wanted them to get involved in further HBO things. And uh, I mean, I can't hold it against them. They don't owe me anything. I don't think it helped them when I was emailing with them, and I said, "Oh, by the way, I've never seen Game of Thrones. I don't know anything about it. And in any event, I don't like stories with magic in them." That was probably not the smartest thing to have done. I don't know. Who knows? So nothing is going to happen soon, or nothing, let's put it this way: nothing is going to happen fast. But when it happens, the force that drives it will be whimsy. Someone will have, some producer or some star will have picked up a paperback on a flight, and it'll be by me. It could be by anyone else of my contemporaries. It'll be by me, and he'll get really excited. And that's what you need to get a project started and even occasionally finished, is one A-lister who's got a driving ambition to do that one particular subject, that project. And right now, there seems not to be anyone who's got that kind of feeling towards anything I've written. But again, I keep saying, I'm repeating myself and boring myself. And I keep saying, we'll see, and we'll see, or maybe we won't see. My paranoia. I think they're waiting for me to die, and then it's going to be like Ian Fleming. It's just going to be, it's going to be, the 20 30s are going to be the Stephen Hunter decade. But
Mhm.
Stephen Hunter, he ain't going to be around to enjoy it because we waited the bastard out. That's sort of, I think, the current thinking in Hollywood now. No, they don't care. They don't know who I am. Maybe, maybe not.
Well, let's hope it's you're around much longer than that. But I suppose anything's possible. I'm curious when you again you say wishing to get it right and also lamenting at Public Enemies that you might never get to see this time on the screen. Is there something? I understand you're allowed to choose your own book or not reveal your secret ambitions. But for instance, I'd be curious to see. Well, actually, I would love to see a Flashman movie done right, but I don't expect to see such a dark, perverse period piece, of Charge of the Light Brigade or
Yeah.
first British Afghan War or something. But is there any historical period or historical event that you as a movie lover feel like hasn't been done justice?
Well, yes, I would certainly say Jack the Ripper.
Mm,
That's not to sell my Jack the Ripper
yes.
because, in a sense, someone could say, they didn't do the real thing justice. But I don't, the last big budget Jack was From Hell with Johnny Depp. And although it was a beautiful production, its solution to the crime was ridiculous.
Mhm.
And it just sent me out spluttering and muttering. I honestly don't think that's why I wrote my Jack. Uh, but I'd love to see Ridley Scott take on Jack the Ripper. I've just seen The Last Duel,
Mm,
which in my estimation was much better than the reviews it got, and which I enjoyed every second of. Uh, I so that would be one. There are still, I mean, they don't make World War II battle movies anymore. That's passed from, I guess, the last one, and it wasn't even really a battle movie. Was Flags of Our Fathers.
mhm,
Um, but I still, to me, and it's more a reflection of my life in the fact that when I grew up in the 50s, World War II was everywhere. I mean,
mhm.
it just, it just saturated the culture, and so I just became a walking jiggling encyclopedia of World War II action, and it is so full of drama. I would love to see this will never happen, but the biggest and most meaningful tank battle in the world was Kursk in July and August, July of 1944 for 12 days. No, not 44, 43 for 12 days, and it was a world. Everyone thinks Stalingrad was the end of World War II in the East, but it was really Kursk, and it was the last great German offensive. And even though the Germans won the uh, won the battle, they lost the war because they just realized they couldn't sustain it, and that's when they started to retreat. And the rest of the war it was ridiculously expensive mopping up, especially with computer graphics making it possible. I would love to see a Battle of Kursk movie. I know no one is going to do it, and if the Russians do it, they'll screw it up.
Mhm.
So I'm not too interested. They just came out with a tank movie a few years. Okay, I don't know if you saw it, Tom. It was called T-34. I mean, it was just ludicrous. It was so ridiculous. I could hardly make myself see it through to the end. But I would like to see Kursk. And somehow that would make a monumental movie. And someone like I guess he's dead now, but was Sergei Bondarchuk, the guy who did the War and Peace? I would love to have seen him do it. Probably the Russians. They've probably got 10,000 T-34s and 3,000 uh, Panzers excellent over there in warehouses. They could do it with they could do it with the real machines. They wouldn't have to. They wouldn't have to do they wouldn't have to do CGI.
Yeah,
But
they wouldn't have to do the Battle of the Bulge in Spain with all the wrong
yeah,
tanks
right,
and the
yeah.
sand. Yeah,
Well, yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. Oh, it's raining sand,
yeah.
and the M48 patent tanks standing in for. Oh, you're supposed to, pretend that's a king tiger. It's really, yeah. I those I can't. I couldn't face that again. I hope those days at least are over for forever.
But yeah, actually, I was going to ask if you had seen because I feel like there have been a some sort of recent crop of Russian or at least Eastern European World War II movies. None of which I've seen, but I've seen some trailers here and there. But it sounds like if that was the most prominent one, it's not worth me spending my time checking it out.
And that's true. I mean, the one thing you have to say about them as opposed to us is they still revere World War II. And if you go to any village in anywhere in Russia, you'll find a freshly painted T-34 on a pedestal with fresh flowers around the base. And that's because that war, it was so calamitous for them. It's still omnipresent in their imagination. It's probably driving their foreign policy, even if nobody says it. And the memory and the tragedy and the scale of that war is it's just something you can't get away from. I see. I mean, to me, I'm cynical here, but I don't know who would care about Lord of the Rings. I mean, to me, World War II on the Eastern Front was Lord of the Rings. You don't need Lord of the Rings. You don't need Mordor when you've got Kursk. It's just insane. But again, old man yapping, yapping his way close to the cocktail hour. Gene, get the vodka out. Anyway,
Well, we won't keep you much longer. I still want to. So just in case you have some sort of suspicion that it's been, I roped you into a one-on-one conversation. We've had viewers. I could see the numbers as they come in, and then had some people in the chat, including some who have Cyrillic names. However, I have not had one that actually wrote a full question for us. So, sometimes we get good questions. Sometimes we've got a little less audience participation. But this is your last chance, audience. If you do have any questions for us, please. And then I guess I'm always curious. I realize that especially these days, if you can travel less, I imagine that much of your reading is research. But is there anything that you're reading lately? Contemporary, old fiction, nonfiction?
I'm really going to have to disappoint you on this. I happen to be in the middle of moving to a new house. It's protracted. It's made worse by certain physical infirmities that I now suffer from, and it's just eating me alive. And that's why I'm not doing much. I don't know what I'm going to do between the end of the Super Bowl and the beginning of the NCAA tournament. It probably wants about a month, but it'll be February is always a bad month for me because I need the stimulation of narrative as exemplified by sports, because what is sports but games or stories, okay? And so that's where I go to relax, and I'm really not reading. I can't. I wish I could point to a book. I wish I could give somebody a plug, but I just can't. Suppose I should say, I can't wait for Jack Carr's new book to come out. He's a friend of mine. He's become a wonderful thriller writer, and I always wait for the next Jack Carr, and uh, and I have my good friend Jim Grady has a
Mhm.
book coming out pretty soon. I haven't read it yet. I love the title. The title is "This Train," and it's about a contemporary train robbery. And there's a subject hasn't. I don't think there's been a train robbery in books since I published Hot Springs, and that wasn't even. That was only. That wasn't dramatized. It was only remembered. So those would be two books that I'm looking forward to. But But stop saying we'll see. But right now, I'm just gonna crank down. I'm gonna move stuff to the new house in the morning on Saturday and in the morning on Sunday, and then I'm riveting myself to the television, and I'll watch every bloody second of the battles of Kursk as they're played out in flesh on the National Football League.
Well, those sound like excellent plans, even if they're less literary. But I wish you a enjoyable Super Bowl viewing, and
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. Thank you.
yes, and a fun cocktail hour tonight. And
Oh,
again,
absolutely.
thank you everyone for tuning in. We have signed copies. In fact, this should be one of them. We have signed copies of Stephen Hunter's latest Targeted. We also have some copies of Basil's War that are signed. I believe those are still first printings, and they're all available from Mysterious Bookshop if you visit us in person or at mysteriousbookshop.com. And I don't know if you have any final parting words, Stephen, but again, thank you so much. This was terrific.
It was my pleasure, and you asked great questions, Tom. It was a good conversation.
Well, good. Well, good night, all. Good night, Stephen, and we'll see you for the next event. And be sure that everyone catches up on the adventures of the Swagger clan. So, good night.
Are we now free to?
Well, I hit the end broadcast button. An error occurred. End broadcast again.
Yeah.
Well, I might have to crudely log out and just dump
Okay.
us out without a debriefing.